Day 4. Strong showing for day 4, guys. Thank you so much for being here on a Friday. We're very excited for this panel. It's a 30-minute panel. First, before we begin, Mr. Jordan Prince could not join us today. He welcomed another Jordan and another Prince into the world. So big round of applause for new member of the Prince family. As mentioned, my name is Pedro Miranda. I work on the creator economy team here at the Solana Foundation, focusing on Web3 social consumer applications, as well as creator-based initiatives. Before we jump in to the meaty topics in this panel, if everyone could just give a quick introduction about what they're currently working on, and then we could dive into the fun stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro. I am Dustin. I am a strategic advisor to Metaplex.
Bartosz, CubeNow, crypto exchange.
Kevin, one of the co-founders of Underdog, handled the product and engineering side of things.
Tony, one of the co-founders of Underdog, minting API on Solana.
I'm Mac. I lead BD and strategy at Metaplex Foundation.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So, Dustin, if you could summarize, what the heck did you guys announce this week?
I mean, I thought it was crystal clear, but if you need more information, I can give it to you.
There were so many different announcements. You guys were also on the main stage, I believe, on Tuesday.
On Tuesday,
So
yeah.
if you could give a summary of what you guys actually announced, and maybe clarify some things, I think that would be helpful for the panelists and everyone else tuning in as well.
Yeah, definitely. So three main things, right? So the guardianship and ultimate decentralization of the programmatic keys that kind of govern all Solana NFTs, moving those over to a secure third party, and then the ultimate decentralization of them. We'll talk about that a little bit. Talking about our philosophy and view at Metaplex of protocol minting fees moving forward, and then also introducing the idea of the utility layer that we're building. So the utility layer is what we're most excited about, and what this is trying to help us do is reduce infrastructural costs, give better data access in CNFTs, and ultimately we view CNFTs as kind of the lifeblood of the global state machine that is Solana, and we believe that if we are going to utilize them in this way, we need to have the system and the infrastructure that makes reading data and writing data onto the chain with CNFTs as easy and as cheap as possible. So we want to have the infrastructural system that doesn't disabuse partners like Underdog protocol from going and selling to the biggest enterprise partners as possible.
So you mentioned Underdog, and I think this is a good time to double click on how you're expecting partners such as Underdog to work with the Metaplex Foundation with regards to this utility layer. So I don't know if Dustin or the Underdog guys want to jump in on how you guys have been working on and how entities should expect to be working with the Metaplex Foundation, going forward.
Yeah, happy to answer this. And at Underdog, we're really taking the open source software that Metaplex has written, Bubblegum being one of those, working with Gummy Roll as well. So taking compression, which is hard to use, involves chewing a lot of glass, and really building an additional layer on top of that. You can think of it as like the Kafka or Next.js of the world. They have an enterprise partner, like a Confluent or a Versal, that packages that software in a way that's easy and accessible to use. And at the end of the day, enterprises aren't going to chew glass. It's really about how expensive and how cheap is it, or how expensive and how difficult it is to integrate blockchain, NFTs, or any Web3 related technology into your stack. And that's what we really focus on at Underdog.
And I think a layer on top of that is startups, developers, enterprises need resources to get started with NFTs and Solana. And so one of the things we fought tooth and nail for is the Metaplex startup program. So what this is going to do is incentivize individuals to build with the standards and the products on Metaplex. And so what that's going to look like is resources, supporters, grant funding as well, and making it really easy and building the bridge to help people to build on Metaplex.
You mentioned the magic word, which is grants. So Dustin, can you tell me more about the incentives?
Let's just be perfectly clear. Metaplex Foundation open for business. If we can help you, if we can bring you, real resources to bring your startup and what you're building on Solana to market, all the better. And right now, like the MPLX token is not what we're going to be granting in. We're going to be granting in USDC to help people at this time while we bring functional governance to the token.
And I think that's with regards to, you mentioned grants. You mentioned this notion of getting different stakeholders in the community involved. So Mac, we heard a lot of different announcements this week with regards to, to Jupiter and to Pyth and some pathways of community-owned protocols. Is that something that the Metaplex Foundation is trying to do here with regards to these incentives to Underdog and other folks, or what's the path here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the community has always been kind of the lifeblood of NFTs on Solana. I think that's what makes Solana special. And so this is obviously a group that we're really excited to partner with. I think a lot of the initiatives that we've taken in the past have really been aimed at trying to improve and grow the ecosystem on Solana, especially with NFTs, and that's something we're excited to do in collaboration with the community.
Bartosz, you've been unusually quiet.
Yeah.
This is your baby.
Yeah, sure. Excited, obviously, about everything that Dustin is doing and Metaplex Foundation. I think it's a step in the right direction, and it's awesome to see people like Kevin from Underdog actually working on making things simpler. At the beginning, when we started, it was really about experimenting and finding product market fit. I think over the past 2-3 years of the NFTs on Solana, we can all agree that the market fit is there. People like NFTs on Solana and like using them. So now it's the question, okay, how do we scale it together? And I think with Dustin coming on board as strategic advisor, this is really having the right people at the helm to take it to the next level.
Yeah, we love NFTs. As I say, Solana NFTs are a hell of a drug. Yeah.
There's this phrase that you use in your talk on Tuesday around bottom-up authority.
Yeah.
I believe, and I think Bartosz talked about experimentation in the early days of Solana NFTs. It's funny to acknowledge that it's not the early days anymore. But Dustin, can you talk about that? Moving away from the experimentation phase, or maybe not moving away, but what does this notion of bottom-up authority actually mean in the current era?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the speech, the programmatic keys that control the libraries of the Metaplex technology, traditionally can act as a single kind of linchpin or a critical failure point for all of Solana NFTs. And so it was important to us to, as we move towards enterprise adoption or enabling more enterprise adoption, that we remove this critical failure point and start to actually take the control over the Solana NFT ecosystem and give it back to the builders. So actually placing these keys into the control of a third-party security firm until we can put this decentralized governance back into place, let it function, and then give the control completely back. What we have done is just to say, we're not going to make changes to them. We're not going to remain in singular control of them. We're actually going to put them into guardianship so that we can show good faith to the community and eliminate this possible threat.
What would you all say about the notion of the nature of this change and the nature of stability right now? Right. This is personally my third breakpoint. We're about to cross 100 million NFTs minted on Solana. Large part of that is due to compression. 2 breakpoints ago, we were actually at 2 million NFTs minted, which is mind-blowing to think about. Bartosz talked about the experimentation in the early days, but now, someone like Tony, for example, you do, like scrappy, hungry BD with small to large enterprises. I'm sure they're looking for stability, right, on what they're actually building on. The contracts that you sign, the pricing will always stay the same or will be deterministic so you can build great products and experiences. So this is more so an open-ended question, but how do you respond to that? Like, how do you ensure stability and continuity here while also invoking innovation?
I mean, I think a good way to kind of answer this question is to say, Tony, what do you expect from us as you go sell at the highest levels of enterprise adoption?
Yeah, I think that there's actually two parts to this question. And I think the enterprise adoption is a separate question that I'm happy to tackle. But I think what this comes down to is how do we turn Metaplex into something that's community ran and decentralized aligned, meaning that we're giving the keys back to the community and we're listening to the community. One of the things that I really want to do is sit down with builders and understand what do they need from Metaplex, create 5, 10 testaments that lead the product decisions here, and then really work to make this decentralized. Meaning that, look, you can trust whatever's in that black box, you can trust the entity that's controlling that black box, but you need to verify. And candidly, you can't verify. And so if it's aligned with decentralization, which is our goal here at Metaplex, you will be able to trust and verify.
And I think one of the questions that comes up a lot is, as we talked about at first, is what is Underdog's role playing in this? And we did answer that when we first came up, but I think one of the other things we'd like to say is it's not just Underdog's show with us, right? We're talking to everybody. We're talking to Viv. We're talking to Mert. We're talking to people that are really, building the bleeding edge future of Solana NFTs, and we want to be as inclusive as possible. Again, that is an effort to give the power back to the builders.
We've talked about, you mentioned Vib, and with regards to compression that I talked about, that almost reaching 100 million NFTs, compression has been such a large part of the Solana scalable consumer experiences story. We've talked in privately around how NFTs will be minted in the billions and trillions, right? So how are these decisions that you all are discussing today actually future-proofing the protocol and ensuring success for the community?
I think we probably would say to Kevin, like to reference some of our conversations of how we're thinking about this. To me, I've had a lot of conversations with individuals, especially here at Breakpoint, that have been experimenting with CNFTs, and we're finding that even at the scale that we are working with now, that the doors that CNFTs open for us, that we are still running into roadblocks of the cost, and whether it's to maintain the data, the infrastructure around those CNFTs, whether to mint those CNFTs, or whether to experiment with them, work with them, retain the talent that is needed to work with them. So I think that working on all of those fronts is what's necessary to actually lay that groundwork. And the utility layer itself is going to be kind of from the vision from the ground up to be built as an ultimate base layer that we can continue to improve upon, but is built for speed. Like the ultra fast lane is what we're trying to do here. Kevin, maybe you want to say more?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're really focused on in terms of the future-proofing side of things is compression offloads a lot of the complexity to the developer in terms of indexing and accessing the data from the chain. And Metaplex has done a lot of work with the DOS API, which is infrastructure developers and teams can spin up themselves or work with an existing RPC provider to spin up. What we want to do with Metaplex is make more types of data accessible. And I think it starts with compressed NFTs. It's a standard that a lot of the community has worked to buy in. We have wallets, we have explorers, we have APIs integrating that standard into their product. But I think as we build these lighter clients that allow you to index compressed data, we do want to keep other standards and data standards in mind as well. So if you're doing generalized compression, that's something we want to keep in mind. But I think we first need to understand what's a product use case for compressed data that we can actually push into an enterprise level, and then start opening up the clients to further types of data as well.
You mentioned different standards. You mentioned some different technical implementations. I'm curious, and Mac, maybe you could start with this. What's your outlook on Solana NFTs in the medium term relative to other ecosystems with regards to everything that we've been talking about here? Let's zoom out for a second and compare ourselves to other tooling available for creators, developers, enterprises.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to answer that. So I think when you look at the different types of NFT ecosystems out there, obviously Ethereum is one that people latch on to. And I think they've carved out a reputation for themselves, right, as being kind of the chain for very high-end PFPs, art, and things like that. And I do think we've done a great job on Solana of building the second largest NFT ecosystem that really has a culture around some of those same elements. But I think where we have a chance to shine is some of the things that really are different than that, and taking advantage of kind of just the low cost and the speed that we have here on Solana. And so in addition to continuing to grow the culture side of NFTs on Solana, I think there's an opportunity to bring in more enterprises and things like that that will actually want to use NFTs to represent digital assets and digital items of all kinds. And so whether that's something like records, ticketing, gaming assets, it really could be anything, right? But I think there's a huge opportunity for us to take advantage of some of those just structural positive aspects that we have here on Solana and make Solana the best chain for that. And so I'm very proud of the work we've done at Metaplex to kind of help facilitate some of that growth, and looking forward to working with the community to take that to the next level.
And I think if I can add on to that, the mental model we've always used at Underdog is NFTs are simply a tool in a business's growth stack. So a lot like they would use HubSpot to connect with their customers, they should be using compressed NFTs to acquire, engage, and retain their customers. And I think what we're seeing a lot of enterprise adoption come around, and this is the second question now, which is what does enterprise adoption of NFTs look like, is I think there's two big buckets. Number one is customer experience, where you're seeing a lot of loyalty and rewards programs being built. And I think where we step in with Metaplex Foundation and Underdog is saying, here's a pilot program of how you can use compressed NFTs, whether you're an SMB, a mid-market, or enterprise, whether you're Boba guys with a Square integration, or whether you're some big enterprise who just needs plug and play. This is how we're going to go ahead and help you, and here's this pilot program. And then I think the second piece here, which is some conversations I've had at Breakpoint, is thinking about data schemas and how do we use compressed NFTs as a database. You have a relational database all the way over here. You can just use normal SQL. You're a gigantic enterprise. You can use, I think it's Bigtable. Bigtable. Thank you. I'm not a developer, so forgive me. And then right in the middle, there's cost and so much opportunity to test. And my hypothesis is compressed NFTs are that perfect middle, and it's a different database, right? This is how we think about Solana. So ultimately, what I think is going to happen in the future of Solana NFTs and at enterprises is how do you use NFTs to acquire, engage, retain your customers, and then also use them to do really interesting things with data.
Can someone help me understand, clearly articulate, what is the problem that we are currently trying to solve today? Because right now, yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle that. So I think right now, it's not that easy to interact with compressed NFTs, particularly on the data side and certain other elements there. And there's kind of a couple options that people currently have. They can connect with an RPC and use some of the services that are provided there, or they can spin up their own DAS implementation. But the reality is that's pretty expensive, right? And so if you think about kind of what an enterprise is looking for, they don't want to have to set up their own DAS. We want to reduce the friction that they would currently have when they try and do things with compressed NFTs on Solana. And so that's really what this utility layer is aimed at solving, is making it easier for them to set up their own kind of light version and have their own autonomous implementation.
And the way that implementations are currently done on Solana take a long time. I think we're lucky enough where our time is anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes even 1. But enterprises are not going to put up with 2 to 3 to 4 months of implementation. They want something that's really short and sweet. They want a POC, they want to learn, and then they want to decide if they're going to buy or they're going to build themselves, right? So I think that it's a really interesting position where Metaplex Foundation can create a lot of really interesting experiences built on the standards that are already embedded into the ecosystem, and bring those into the enterprise.
Oh, can I have Mac and Tony answer all my questions? Is that an option?
Yeah.
You're taking over, Dustin?
Actually, one more
advisor
point.
to the panel.
Big panel energy. But anyway,
big panel energy.
Well, one other thing. I think the problem that on the NFT side is one, but also the other problem for enterprises, right? Is how do I decrease my CAC and increase my LTV? And how do I create really interesting experiences where I can create interoperability, where I can take like an airline experience or a credit card mile experience. That's what enterprises are really wanting to do in their future of marketing, in their future of community. And I think NFTs sit at the perfect place to decrease their CAC and increase their LTV. And if we can do that, then I think that's what the future of NFTs look like.
It's funny, actually, we had a very similar experience, right, where we ended up using Underdog. We were just trying to send a very simple email update that a product had been released, and MailChimp blocked us, a handful of other email providers blocked us because we were a crypto company. And so what we ended up doing is using Underdog to just send compressed NFTs instead of emails with people's access code to use the product. And so I think that's a great example of ways that enterprises can start leveraging compressed NFTs in ways that maybe we don't traditionally think about NFTs.
And if I can add on to that as well, I'll give it to you, Kevin, I promise. I'm having fun. One of the things that Versal really was great at is they added a GUI onto their standard, right? And I think that's what enabled for this to happen is we had a no-code dashboard that simplifies everything from managing Merkle trees to minting the NFTs to creating the metadata to updating the metadata. And that's what enterprises, mid-market, and SMBs, even developers are looking for. And I think this is the opportunity where Metaplex can do this.
Is there any, you mentioned the Metaplex utility layer. Can you tell me more about how, are there going to be any increases in composability and interoperability opportunities, or is that going to be a trade-off with ease and accessibility? Can you talk more about that?
I think the blockchain already provides an element of interoperable data. But the problem is no one uses it. There's, on the development side, the true composability, we work with Sphere. We want to integrate squads into our program. And I think that composability is there. But as you move up the stack, the data is still very much siloed, even though it all exists on chain. We have interesting data who everyone is, who's a Mad Lab, who's an SMB. These are all essentially targeted lists, right? But this data is not that interesting yet. And we need to bring more of this data on chain so we can start segmenting and targeting users. We think of it as actions and turning them into transactions. And that's really what a compressed NFT is, attaching a little bit of metadata to a transaction. And once you have this interesting data on chain, it really brings this interoperability of data into your application. And we have partners like Solarplex where they use these reactions for people that actually engage in the app. And you can now take these reactions on another one of our friends, Harkle at Mixtape. You can use those reactions and react on a mixtape within that application. It's a very small toy example, but I think that's an element of hey, we've brought a little bit of data on chain. The more places that I can use these NFTs or use this data, the more valuable it becomes.
And just to add on to that too, I think, right, you can imagine a scenario where more and more people are using compressed NFTs, the size of the state is growing, and then therefore accessing that data and indexing it becomes more challenging. And so if we have a standard way of offering that data for people to look at and use, I think it just actually enhances the composability that we have on Solana.
So we've talked about the present, the future. I actually want to go back into the past and acknowledge that this is a fresh paint for Metaplex. This is a new kind of approach. How is this? How would you categorize, maybe Dustin or Mac? How would you categorize the difference in approach from the previous Metaplex approaches?
I think we can just kind of put it out there operationally speaking, right? I think Metaplex traditionally has operated at two, wildly different parts of the stack, right? At the actual base level and kind of at the top level of marketplaces, both with the token standard and the creator studio. So the focus 100% has moved away from the creator studio. We've decided not to play kind of anywhere between in the stack here and just focus at the bottom and partner as much as we can to kind of build up on the standard from there. So instead of half-assing two things, we've decided to whole-ass one thing.
And just to add on to that too, I think, right, if you look at the work that we already do at the standard level and with Bubblegum and DAS and all these things, a lot of the infrastructure that we're talking about now is very complementary to the work that's already being done at those levels. And so I think, to Dustin's point, having that renewed focus, if you will be beneficial for everyone.
Bartosz, any insights to that?
Yeah, sure. So the standards are tricky, and coming up with them is pretty tricky. Like the original program for metadata, the idea there was to keep it like as simple as possible. And I think like moving that to like outside of the control of foundation to like third party is pretty interesting, because once you're this like central authority, you always have this temptation of add more things. Like if you're an engineer, you have this program that works, and you are like, oh, maybe I will add one more thing to it. And it puts companies or people that are using it in sometimes weird situations. And that like allows, I think the separation now and focus on the standard allows you to innovate more, where previously they were in this like dual spot where we are a for-profit company that tries to maybe extract value rather than innovate and bring more people into the space. And I think Dustin is great for that.
I think the schema that Dustin, that you talked about, is very relevant to Bartosz's answer with regards to innovating on standards, right, and not having to focus in other places. So I'm curious if that resonates with you, if it's more so about focusing on standards. And less so on other things going on around.
I think it's a philosophical question. You were one of the first people I talked to when I decided to move into Web3 full-time in Solana many years ago. And we had a conversation that was about, if you are creating the standards, or if you are kind of leading in a Web3 sense, it's not about leading from the front and saying this is how we're going to do things. It's not about saying this is what necessarily the direction of the vision is if you're providing that base level infrastructure. It's about clearing the path and making a fertile field. And I think that the ecosystem, generally speaking, makes the best decisions for itself. And so the idea that, if you are in 110% control of the standard, or if you're in control of all of Solana NFTs, it's not admitting that the ecosystem and where we're going is not bigger than yourself. And I think it's an important step that we're all taking here to say that even though these great geniuses, I use the term loosely, but I do think that, I think they created something that was great and wonderful and massive, and now it's time to decide what that future looks like, and I think that future should be decided by the ecosystem. I think it's a big step.
Any concluding remarks? We have less than a minute here. Mac, if you want to take it home.
Sure. Yeah. No. Look, we're open for business, as Dustin said. We're excited to work with the community on this, and I think there's a lot of exciting just opportunities for Solana NFTs as a whole. Whether it's some of the enterprise solutions that we discussed today, whether it's certain ways that creators can try new and exciting use cases that maybe weren't possible with kind of the prior iteration of NFTs. But whatever it is that people are looking to do, we want them to do it on Solana.
Also, awesome. If you have any feedback, have any thoughts, find me, Tony Placencia on Twitter, Telegram. I'm open to feedback. I want to hear your thoughts. We're building with each other.
Yeah, and if you didn't like anything I said, my name is Jordan Prince, and you can find me on Twitter.
Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for a very refreshing look about the future of Metaplex. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Peter.